I think I'm live. Got some chat, so I think I'm live. Cool. Right, we're going to need this. So I'm getting it now. This is however you pronounce that. I literally am not going to even try. But cheers. Anyone who's watching this at a time where this is an appropriate thing to do. Okay, good. As normal, tell me if you can hear me, or I guess tell me if you can't hear me. A nice living room in Scotland, eh? Well, kind of. These are horrific office blinds. We're renting, and I've moved to Scotland. That's part of the reason why I haven't done one of these for a bit. Yes, I've been moving house, and it's a long way. It's quite annoying to move all up, like when you've lived somewhere for a long time, and then you have to pack everything up and move. It's tedious. But we've relocated to Scotland, so I live in Edinburgh now, which is cool. You can hear me all right? Good. Let's try the the volume on this video, see if that's contrasting right or not. Rewind a little bit, hear a bit of this guy. So that's his voice and this is mine. Does that sound about right? Let me know. Christ, where's that coming from? Okay, cool. Volume is fine. Good, good. I'm just going to keep going. I'm trying to talk quietly because it's just a small flat and my wife's going to sleep somewhere in not very far away and she might, I don't know, we'll see what happens. Cool. Okay, so let's get this going. This time round, what I'm going to be doing is going over just the opening statement of by this guy called JimBob. Let me try and make sure I say his name correctly because I keep wanting to say a rude word. You couldn't hear or see the video. That's probably because I wasn't sharing it. That's a good point. See, this is I've got the chat up. So I'm determined not to do what happened with the Richard Carrier thing. All right, here you go. Now I'm sharing.
Anything useful.
So this
what
is,
if God magically made a bigger rock in this example?
That's Planet Peterson, I guess. I don't actually know how he likes to be referred. But presumably you can hear that fine. The perfect amount of JimBob, which is none. Yeah, it's my video blurry. I think the camera's having a hard time focusing for some reason. Anyway, we'll snip all this out before we publish a video. I think that's good, but tell me if you can't hear that perfectly well. Planet Jordan Peterson, I don't think so. That is Planet of, his name is Planet. Okay, I'm not going to call him Planet. I'm not going to refer to him very much, I think, in this, because we're not going to watch his opening. To get back to it, what I was saying was, Eric. Okay, good. What I was saying was, this is what I'm going to talk about tonight is just the JimBob's opening. So I think he's a precept. I really know very much about him. I feel like I've heard his name. He's like a debate guy, but I've not like sat and watched any of his stuff. I just assume he's a generic precept guy. So we're going to go through the stuff that he said here. It kind of triggered me, and I needed to talk about it. And my wife's not the right person to talk at length about these things. She's not interested. So you guys can be the recipients of my thoughts here. So I want to what you'll see if you haven't seen this before. It's a strange opening. It's a strange debate for this reason. It's like the entire focus of what JimBob says is entirely offensive, in the sense that he's just criticizing naturalism entirely. And and I watched, I don't know, maybe half of it. There was really no attempt by JimBob to sort of just do his own like defending, it seemed to me. So he was just interested in defeating naturalism as if that's all that's really required. And then, I don't know, last person standing wins or something. So in a way, the most interesting thing about this debate is not the philosophy. The most interesting thing, at least from my point of view, is the kind of performance and what type of behavior was on display. So I increasingly see that this type of is it is it aggressive? Sometimes it's aggressive, but it's some kind of masculine dominance behavior or something where one debate bro is super like over the top on the offensive and is not really interested in anything, is not curious, isn't no inkling of self-doubt or worry or curiosity or anything. It's just the I'm right, fuck you, that whatever. So in a way I think that's like kind of more thought-provoking than the philosophy, but let's have some fun picking apart some of the stuff that he said. Needless to say, I think he's making some silly mistakes, and I also think it might be interesting and maybe helpful to think about the sorts of things he's saying more carefully than he is, so that we can, I don't know, avoid thinking in the lazy way that he's doing. So I think let's, before we get into it, because Eric Planet Peterson goes first with a fairly short intro, which I'm not going to play, but you can fact check it by watching afterwards to see if I misrepresent him. But it was really only one thing there that I wanted to bring up, which was he said something kind of strange, which, I mean, the debate title is does naturalism explain reality better than theism? And clearly the terms that need to be clarified, naturalism, you would think would be one of those, and possibly theism. I mean, it's helpful if we can pin that down, right? Explanation is also one of those terms. I'd like to know what reality scope there as well. So there's a lot of like technical terms going on that would make a difference to how you might approach it. Unfortunately, Peterson didn't say much in terms of like what he meant by naturalism, although he did gesture towards the notion that he was, I mean, he used the term methodological naturalism. And it seemed to me that there was a kind of like, it didn't really make sense to use that term in the way that this debate title seemed to require. And I wanted to explain a little bit about how I was thinking about things first before we get into the React stuff, because I'll refer back to my thinking as I critique JimBob. So there's something strange about saying that methodological naturalism explains reality. Like I just think there's a kind of category mistake there. That's not the right type of thing to say about methodological naturalism. So in order to make this point clearly, and I think it'd probably be the point of this entire stream, is I want to distinguish a couple of like often closely related concepts. And it's basically the big mistake that JimBob makes, as far as I can see, is to conflate these things together. So what am I talking about? It's materialism, physicalism, let's say philosophical naturalism, and methodological naturalism. Right? They're four terms that are thrown around in this sort of debate. And JimBob basically just ran them all together as if they were the same. And I think I want to say something about how, at least, I see them being different from one another, and that if I was able to articulate that in this debate format, I think it would have meant that there'd have been a lot more things that you could have said that could have gone in different directions and stuff. So first things first is that like these terms in particular are terms of art in philosophy, and it's not like there's some contract that philosophers sign that says we will always use this word in this way forever. It's they're contested, and it's not like there's only one way you could think about them. Naturalism itself is a word that's used in lots of different ways, sort of overlapping usages. Same with materialism too, because I mean, if you just think about let's just like declutter the overlapping meanings of the word to some extent. Sometimes you could think of materialism being kind of cultural critique. We're too materialistic in this capitalist world or something. Like Trump is materialistic because he has golden wallpaper or something like that. Obviously, that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about the cultural notion of materialism. materialism is sometimes used in it's sometimes used, I think, in a philosophy of mind where we've got this kind of whole setup of like the series of positions ranging from dualism and idealism and materialism. So you might be introduced to the terminology, you might be more familiar with philosophy of mind stuff. I think there's talking of philosophy of science and philosophy of physics about the nature of material and how it's changed over time too. And then again, on top of, I mean, there's probably a whole load of other areas of philosophy that use that term differently as well, or at least in overlapping ways, right? But in here, what we're talking about is a philosophy of religion. So it kind of has a whole load of other connotations too. So, materialism is in American evangelical culture has been sort of bogeyman that's associated with like Darwinism and or we come from monkeys and there's no design or whatever. And that's basically what's on display in JimBob's rhetoric throughout this opening. It's like extreme a straw man might sort of sounds a bit unfair, but like it's an extremely simplistic way of looking at these terms, right? So I want to say something like material. I want to sort of arrange these ideas in a scale so that we've got like at one extreme end, we've got this notion of like materialism, and that says it's like a position that says something like everything that exists is made of material, is matter, is made of material, and I don't know really if anyone actually ever says that as such. They kind of do, but maybe we can think of someone like Democritus saying that because he's famous for advocating a view where there's uh, basically atoms in a void bumping into each other. That's all that there is, right? So that's at one end of the scale, right, where everything that exists is material. Now, what does material mean? What is matter? Well, I think one simple way of thinking about it is, and it's not necessarily very helpful, but like a way of drawing a picture is that you can think of it as like stuff that is extended in space, maybe in space time if you want to be fancy about it. But it's a kind of pre-theoretical, intuitive idea that some space is empty, some space has got stuff in it. What is that stuff? It's matter. It's just what it is to be matter. It's the stuff that occupies space. So that's one way of thinking about it. And then it's natural to think, well, some things look like they're, like a balloon looks like it's material, but actually it's empty on the inside, isn't it? So it's hardly any of it is actually material. The notion of materiality here sort of naturally leads you to thinking, well, there must be some like, unbreakable stuff where it really does just fill the space that it's sort of in, right? And that's what we mean by material in this sense. Now, maybe there's a period in the history of science where that's actually an idea. I think possibly you could say that's kind of like Cartesian sort of mechanism view of how what's going on in the causal order. That there's this sort of material stuff bumping into other material stuff like billiard balls bouncing around. It may have been, I think, I'm not a historian of the philosophy of science, and I think there's a lot of nuance about what those ideas were. But let's say, as a caricature at least, that is a view that's associated in the sort of 17th century or something. And then, as science gets, progresses, I think it sort of pulls away from that crude notion of materialism, at least in the following sorts of ways. That physics becomes a bit more it becomes a bit more sophisticated, frankly. So we're also thinking about the notion of forces, which doesn't really itself ever really like it's not that amenable to the notion of like pure everything that exists is material because it's a force material. But also we're thinking about things like fields, like quantum fields or whatever, energy, curved space-time, black holes, whatever. A lot of those things are not naturally easily comprehended in terms of this, like 17th century billiard balls bouncing in a void kind of thing. And while the entities, the residents of the universe, according to physics, become more varied, they also become more exotic because they're kind of weirder and not the sort of thing that your pre-theoretic intuitions tells you is going to be there, right? So physics develops and goes off in a different direction. It pulls away somewhat from this simple notion of materialism. So if we say materialism just means there's this notion that there's extended stuff in space and that's all that there is, that then physicalism in my landscape as I'm drawing it now means something like the stuff that physics thinks exists. So that's much more liberal in the sense that it will allow fields and forces and gravity, blah, blah, blah. So in that sense, then, we've got materialism at one end, and then it's kind of a broader, more inclusive, if you like, more plural landscape that's given to us by physics. So physicalism would say something like everything that's, let's say, everything that's in the causal order is either directly the type of thing that physics will describe, right? So you open a physics textbook and it might talk about particles and fields and forces and stuff. If it's directly those types of things, and that's what physicalism will allow. But also physicalism will allow stuff that's like emergent from those things or depends upon those things. So you might say like tigers are not the sorts of things you would find in a physics textbook, but they are the sorts of things that, you know, you can see how it would just completely depend upon, reduce to possibly, or emerge from stuff that you would describe in a physics textbook. So there's a classic kind of idea that the sciences are arranged in a hierarchy with sort of physics at the bottom, and then things like chemistry and biology and sociology or whatever forms a hierarchy above that. So given that physics is at the bottom of that, it's this physicalism is the view that there's nothing other than stuff that fits into that picture. Now, naturalism then would be an even more inclusive perspective, right? Where what's going on here is that naturalism is saying something like the explanations in the causal order are always given in terms of other things that are, well, I suppose it's more kind of a prohibition. It's like saying when we look for explanations of like why causal things happen, what we don't do is resort to thinking that maybe some like powerful entity or agency that's beyond the physical constraints is responsible for that happening, right? So if your crops fail, or I don't know, you lose your left shoe, you don't just think, oh, it's reasonable to posit that there might be some kind of shoe-stealing fairies or, you know, some witches cursing your crops or something, right? That the naturalist thinks that explanations, causal explanations, are in terms of other things inside a kind of closed causal order, and it doesn't have, yeah, by definition, a supernatural then it's just an entity, a kind of mind or agency that exists over and above that causal order. So that's how I want to think about it. So it's sort of like materialism on the one hand is really restrictive, physicalism is grounded in physical sciences and therefore a bit more open-minded, and then naturalism is really just ruling out a certain type of stuff that you wouldn't find in physical sciences. But the way I'm thinking about it, so long as your idea of abstract objects, for instance, isn't that they are caused by or like determined by agents outside the causal order, then they can still be considered part of the natural world, even though they're not legitimately things that physics would directly study and don't really seem to depend on things that physics would study. So you could be, in my view, like a Platonist who is a naturalist. And my friend Scott Berman, who's a philosopher in St. Louis, who wrote a book about Platonism, which you should all get and read because it's a very interesting, well-written book. He considers the same idea, basically. So it's like that the natural world is just that stuff that's kind of there independently of any of us and any other agents. It's not brought about and it's not dependent upon a mind of any type, thinking it and keeping it in existence. Right, anyway, let's start with this. So naturalism rules out these kind of like weird explanations. It appeals to closed causal order, which physicalism, I guess, also does as well. But naturalism allows things that physicalism would be less willing to allow, like abstract objects potentially, or like moral values, stuff like that. And then there's a distinction between two types of naturalism. So I believe this terminology goes back to Plantinga. The distinction probably goes back before that, but Plantinga calls it philosophical naturalism and methodological naturalism. I really don't like the term philosophical naturalism because it doesn't really help. Like, yeah, of course, it's a philosophical term. They're both philosophical terms. These are all philosophical terms. You could call it philosophical materialism if you want. I think it's better to call it something like ontological naturalism and methodological naturalism. And then the distinction is a bit clearer to see because ontological naturalism is just the view I was describing, which is saying there are no things of this type. Well, at least no things of that type that are impinging on the causal order. Right? That's just if you think there's an outside agent changing or fucking about with the causal order, that's what naturalism says doesn't exist. And methodological naturalism just says, like, it's an attitude about how you do science, right? And it just says when we do science, we adopt, for at least pragmatically, the idea that naturalism is true. So the difference is just simply supposed to be something like you could be like a theist, you could be a vicar or something, and an astronomer. And at the same time as you're doing your astronomy, you've got your naturalist, your methodological naturalist hat on. I suppose you've just got your naturalist hat on, and the method is that you put that hat on when you're doing science, and maybe you take it off again when you go into church or whatever. But the idea is that, like, the methodological naturalist is sort of open-minded about what really exists, but they're just insisting this is a method for doing science. So that's hopefully helpful to just set out a couple of say a few words about those different ideas and how they overlap with each other. And yeah, as I said, I'm going to come back to that sort of range of different options as I talk about JimBob. But I think just whilst we're on Eric, and this is what seemed to me strange about saying methodological naturalism could be something that explains reality better than theism, because methodological naturalism is just an attitude that you take towards doing science. That's not itself a claim about how the world is. So it's not the sort of thing that's the type, it's not the right type of thing to compare against a metaphysical claim, a claim about what there is, theism. I mean, methodological naturalism is an idea about how you do science. So the two things are like apples and oranges, and you can't really say, like, I just think it doesn't make sense to say that methodological naturalism explains reality. At very most, it explains why you take a certain approach to doing science. It's because you like methodological naturalism. Yeah, so I think it's kind of like it's a mistake. It's just a kind of imprecise use of a term. Basically, we just fine. Okay, you know what? This is just some debate bros talking about stuff. So why am I being so picky? Well, for one thing, I like doing that. It's fun. But secondly, this leads into that. It seems to me it's the thread that explains the whole rest of the tangent of the debate, because by not really, like, if only he'd said naturalism like the way I was just explaining it then, I just think none of JimBob's arguments really start to work. There are arguments he could make which would put pressure on my idea, but the things he was saying don't really work. So anyway, that's I think the intro out of the way. Let's see. So what do? I go back to the screen and press play, and we'll see what's going on.
How would the way it rolls change? Right, it depends on
15-minute opening as well. The floor is all yours.
All right, thank you.
Okay, before we get any further into it, let's say something nice about JimBob. He's got an impressive beard. He's a hirsute gentleman with a impressive looking beard and a full head of hair. I am a little bit suspect that there's grey in the beard, which, like, is a cool thing that cool people have, obviously. No grey in the hair. Not seeing. I would have expected a little bit around the temples. Not seeing any fraying. So I wonder, is this a grey hair here? I don't know. Just wonder. It makes me suspicious when. I guess it makes me suspicious if somebody dyes their hair. I don't know why. Anyway.
The topic is naturalism versus theism, which better explains reality. I want to point out that reality itself is a metaphysical claim. In fact, naturalism can't justify metaphysics. Now, I think this.
Yeah. So, yeah. Naturalism. The way I was saying about it before, like, methodological naturalism is not metaphysical view; it's methodological view. Just naturalism per se is a metaphysical view. It's a claim about what reality is like, and I think that, like, he's using the word metaphysics to mean like things like abstract objects, really, stuff that's non-physical. He thinks that that's beyond physics, so it's like what physics can't talk about, what physics doesn't want to acknowledge exists or something. But that's not, I mean, this is pretty easy to Google, but like the word metaphysics, I mean, clearly it's meta, meaning, I guess, above or beyond, or beyond, yeah, something like that in Greek. After, and actually, and physics broadly means what we mean by physics now. And well, I mean, obviously not in content, but like the idea of the physics is the same sort of idea, but it's not like Aristotle thought that this is what happens beyond physics, about when we start talking about all the non-physical things in the metaphysics. I mean, it's just the library arrangers just didn't know where to put this metaphysics book when they were sorting out the corpus of Aristotle, so they chucked it at the end after physics, and that's where the name came from. So these days, metaphysics means like the claims, the study of the world as it is in itself, right? Not as depending on how you think about it or how you value it or something, just what it actually is like. Yeah. So I mean, the idea that naturalism can't, I think what he's saying, naturalism can't justify metaphysics. Well, this is his idea. This is his one little idea that he has throughout this whole opening, is that there's a sort of conceptual or abstract stuff. And if you're a strict materialist, then well, how does that work for you, kind of thing. And this is his first sort of dance around that little idea by saying that naturalism, by which he means strict reductive materialism, doesn't have the sort of theoretical resources to provide an account of things that he thinks of as being like immaterial and stuff. Taken, straightforwardly, it feels like a bit of a gibberish sentence, right? And naturalism can't justify metaphysics. I mean, like, it's, brain hurting to try and like cast that into the terminology of professional philosophy. It's just, yeah, it doesn't really work like that. Anyway, let's keep. I think I skipped over one of my favorite facts about JimBob, which is that I didn't know anything about him really before this, but the guy who runs Modern Day Debate introduces the two debaters and says of JimBob, among the other weird cornucopia of things that he kind of does or whatever, is that he's a cartoonist. He's a political cartoonist, which I really hope that that's what he does for a living, because I really like the idea that people can just live by drawing cartoons. I mean, and I'm very jealous if that's actually his he lives off drawing cartoons. That's amazing. I do wonder what the yeah, anyway, well, maybe it'll come up later, I don't know. Yeah, cartoonist, that's cool.
This is the first time my opponent that I've ever debated opened with declaring the inability of his opponent to undercut his worldview. He's arguing for knowledge.
Yeah, so you might also notice that he's got kind of a Chad energy, and it's as I was saying right at the beginning, I think it's part of the kind of dominance behavior thing that's going on. He's quite patronizing and uber self-confident. He's kind of laughing to himself about what his debate opponent has said. And it's disrespectful right at the beginning. He doesn't respect this guy. He's not interested in listening to him. He doesn't think there's any possibility that he's got any good arguments or whatever. He's smug, he's condescending, he's being a bit of a prick. He's not being like aggressive, as hostile. For modern day debate, it's kind of modest, I suppose, but still, it stands out to me that he's being a bit of a dick, and I wouldn't be surprised if I was to YouTube him and go down some rabbit holes that there probably is some terrible behavior somewhere that's on display somewhere from him. Tell me in the chat if I've got the wrong end of the stick and he's mild-mannered and nice, but I kind of thought it would be he's fair game because he's being a bit of a prick in this. I don't know.
Arguing that knowledge exists, right? So even if I said, okay, I won't use the word knowledge, but I will argue that naturalism and specifically methodological naturalism.
It's interesting that he actually just goes specifically methodological naturalism, but doesn't ever distinguish it from any of the other landscape of ideas that I was talking about in the first place. I mean, he could have said, oh, my debate opponent's just made a stupid mistake by trying to say that methodological naturalism, an attitude about how we should best do science, can explain the nature of the world, because that's a kind of category mistake. I mean, he could have said that, and it would have been a fun point for him to make, but he doesn't. And what he does is, for some reason, say specifically methodological naturalism, and then never be specific about methodological naturalism throughout, well, at least the first 45 minutes that I watched of this. I'd be very, very surprised if he then became extremely nuanced towards the end of the discussion.
It assumes a whole slew of things that can't be justified under naturalism. We're talking about immaterial things that naturalism cannot explain the existence of. Now,
so as I said a minute ago, then, just think how jarring this is to hear, given my view of what naturalism means, and that naturalism is just the kind of like the claim that there's no agency outside the causal order, agency that can affect things in our world, right? But if that's all that you're getting rid of, then that doesn't mean that there's no immaterial things, right? Remember, this is not materialism. It's not even necessarily physicalism, right? So the claim would be something like, you can agree with the physicalists that everything, all causal explanations are to be done in terms that the physicalist would describe, right? Stuff that's either directly describable by physics or that's in some way reducible to, dependent on, emergent from stuff that's described by physics. They can agree with the physicists on that, but they're just going to say, well, it doesn't mean that that's the only stuff that there is. It's just we don't think there's anything like agency, ruining my crops and rustling at the window, so it must be a, sign from God or something. That's the type of thing that they're ruling out, but it doesn't mean that they're necessarily ruling out the idea that, the best way to think about like numbers or something is some kind of Platonist view. The naturalists might be completely open-minded to that. They might be open-minded to the notion that there's, moral values that are real things too. Or they might be a dualist or they might have some non-reductive account of the mind, although they'd have to be careful to make sure that it would fit it in with how the causal closure principle would work there. But straightforwardly, they're just not committed, in virtue of being a naturalist, to there not being anything beyond crude material bumping into one another. So yeah, this is basically the theme of this.
Naturalists always grant themselves this category. They grant themselves information. I've never stepped in information. They grant themselves facts. In fact, he wrote a book about facts, yet...
So, I'm not going to take all night doing this, but, here we go, he's saying that naturalists help themselves to a bunch of stuff, as if they're not allowed to do that. But that would be kind of illegitimate or something if they had espoused a principle of harsh materialism and then went back on that straight away. But if that's not what they're doing, then it's not fair to characterize it as helping themselves. I mean, does the theist help themselves to non-material categories? No, he just thinks it's part of this. He's allowed to posit those types of things on his view. Well, same thing over here. I'm positing a bunch of stuff. Let's posit some stuff and then see how good the stuff is that I've posited. Right, that's the game. That's how this actually works. Is you make some hypothesis to see if there's, make an ontological claim about the way that the world is, and does it pay its way? Right? Is it worth the ontological cost? Right? Is it pay its way in theoretical virtue? Does it do theoretical work for you? That seems to be the right way to approach this. In which case, I can posit anything I like. It's only bad if it's like a falling foul of some kind of like a stricture of rationality. Like, is it ad hoc, or is it like a I'm positing something that could be explained by positing much simpler, fewer things or something? Is it right? Like, those are the types of things that are relevant. It's not just that I have to have both of my shoelaces tied together and only restrict my attention to material bumping into each other in a void, and anything else that if I say that there's anything else, then I'm like being naughty in some description. Right? That's just the way that he's framing it. It's very I guess it is straw man like, because it's making the opponent's position as extreme as possible. And I suppose it's a bit like if I was you could just caricature theism and then just insist that that's his view and never really ask him or wait for him to explain what his actual view is. Just be, oh, you think of a sky daddy with a beard in the sky and throwing thunderbolts down, and that's what I'm rejecting, and that's your view. And then never letting him say, well, no, actually, I'm a whatever Calvinist, so I don't think that, blah, blah, blah. I never let him say that and just pinned a shit view on him. I guess that just is straw manning. So maybe my complaint is that he is straw manning. But I kind of just wonder if it's like straw manning makes it sound like it's deliberate, like you do know what his real view is, but you're doing it on purpose. I don't know with this, and I can't actually make my mind up if I was thinking about this C.S. Lewis thing about Jesus has to be a liar, a legend, or Lord, or whatever. And I think with this guy, I can't figure out if he's an idiot or ignorant or disingenuous, like with a capital I. Doesn't really work. There's probably another I there. Like, is he bullshitting, or does he not know, or is he an idiot? I can't quite figure it out. He's quite articulate, so it's not a complete fool. I can understand. I mean, like, if the guy's cartoonist, then he's picking all this up in his own research, and it's very easy to use words out of step with how professional philosophers use them if you're studying on your own, or if you just watch apologetics YouTubes and talk to like people who are in a very closed circle. He might be the most well-meaning and intelligent person in the world and just have like an impoverished diet of resources that he's working with. He might be doing the best he can. I don't know which of those is right. Someone, tell me if you do know, or if you think you know.
Naturalism can't tell you where a fact is, but they rely on these things called facts.
Naturalism can't tell you where a fact is. That sort of presupposes that naturalism takes the view that everything that exists somewhere, and that facts exist. Both of those, you can. This is another thing, I guess. It probably come up a load, but there are accounts of things like fact or truth or whatever, which are like deflationary, and then they're just going to say stuff like, it's just not true. Strictly speaking, that facts exist in the same way, or the same way as like concrete particulars. I just don't really see why. I mean, it's a very austere materialism that says even facts exist at spatiotemporal like locations. Maybe I think maybe David Lewis once has this view of sets being located where the elements of their sets are, and maybe you can sort of cook up some idea about facts in the same sort of way. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, the sort of naturalism view that I was picking out would be able to just say, it's an abstract object, right? Cool. What's the problem? I'm not saying everything that exists space and time. I'm just saying everything interacting in the causal order maybe is like that. Or at least I'll let physicists tell me the right way to think about that. But I'm not going to say everything that I could bump into a fact. That's what I have to hold to on naturalism.
Right? Knowledge itself, mind, right? He grants himself evaluation. By the way, under his view, evaluations would be merely naturalistic physical processes, right? Not.
And see there how he runs the two things together. Like he's not interested in distinguishing physical or physicalist ideas from natural and naturalistic ideas. So I mean, same thing.
Distinct from the things he's describing. So to say naturalism can describe anything, right, is to say natural processes describe natural processes. Well, sorry, you're this is dominoes all the way down. So
I just genuinely can't follow that. Like he's saying natural processes describe natural processes. I mean, yeah, I just there's something kind of like can't quite get my head around like what he thinks the ponage is about talking about descriptions, other than just simply to say, well, what do you think about abstract objects? And I wish he just sort of made it a bit more. Why don't you just offer it up as a here's an idea that would prompt further conversation. What's your theory of abstractor? Rather than trying to ponage him the whole time with like, oh, you can't even describe describing because that involves immaterial objects or something. But it's part of the dominance behavior, basically.
when we're talking about worldviews, this is a worldview debate. This is theism versus naturalism. This is a worldview. Worldviews typically consist of three branches: epistemology, which he doesn't want me to deal with, knowledge; metaphysics, which he cannot deal with, he has to grant himself; and usually ethics, but for the sake of argument tonight, I'm going to probably focus more on teleology, which deals...
I think I listened to this too much today. I was listening to it as I was like walking the dog and like doing the washing up and stuff. So obviously it's triggering for me. Anyone who watches this channel, you'll know that I get annoyed by people saying precepts really, but laying the law down about worldviews, worldview analysis and stuff. And it just strikes me as plucked out of thin air most of the time. So we're told worldviews must have ethics, metaphysics, and what's it, epistemology. This is just like, I mean, that's just like some of the topics you study in philosophy. I don't know why that's like got to be the ingredients of everybody's self worldview or whatever. And again, last time I was doing one of those Eli videos, I was pushing this sort of worldview dilemma where it's like, I mean, if a worldview is supposed to be some uber developed account of those three topics, it's just not clear that it's fair to think that everybody has to have that. Like, it's just not even realistic, and it can't be considered an intellectual deficit, or kind of, you don't lose the debate just because you don't have an answer to every metaphysical question. It's just something like a weird, it's an obvious burden shifting kind of attempt to push you into overreaching and having to defend every aspect of philosophy, and all he has to do is just sort of nitpick at it or something. By the way, I suppose that's probably what's attractive to some of these dude bros about precept, because sometimes sort of atheist critiques or skeptical people's critiques of religion sometimes seems like, well, you just have to knock down the religious people's arguments rather than providing your own one, and maybe precept like turns the tables in that way, and that's why it's not really about defending Christianity, it's about attacking atheism instead. So I guess that's probably why people like this like it, because it appeals to the sort of Chad dominance nature that they like to display in public. Yeah, anyway, what was the other thing he said that I talked myself out of what I was thinking? Can we rewind a couple of seconds?
About facts, yet naturalism can't tell you where a fact is, but they rely on these things called facts, right? Knowledge itself, mind, right? He grants himself evaluation. By the way, under his view, evaluations would be merely naturalistic physical processes, right? Not distinct from the things he's describing. So to say naturalism can describe anything, right, is to say natural processes describe natural processes.
Oh, I see. I think I understand a bit more what his point was there then. So he's trying to say, if you have this, I guess he's trying to say something like, if you have a sort of monolithic or something ontology where there's just one type of stuff, then evaluating, yeah, it felt like I understood it for a minute then, but because the thing is, okay, I get it, right? Like how, molecules looking at other molecules or something, it doesn't seem like they're different enough to do an evaluation. I guess it's something like that. But I kind of just want to be like, well, what's the Christian account of what an evaluation is? I mean, is that even part of your religion? What the fuck is that got to do? Do you just think all? I mean, maybe the reason he doesn't try and explain anything is that he just thinks all you have to have is some abstract objects or something, not just material anyway, and that's it. And then there's no other questions in philosophy. There's nothing else to worry about. Like, what is a fact on his view? I mean, presumably he hasn't got a particularly well worked out theory of fact or proposition or anything. But let's just set aside this sort of childlike worry that they have to be explained into Democritean terms of like particles bumping into one another. Let's just avail ourselves of the full resources of Christian theism. What's the account there? Do you think there's any problems? Why can't we talk about that? Like an honest. So I suppose it's unfair to say it's not honest, but it feels like it's a dishonest approach, because a fairer, at least more balanced way of doing this would just be to spend half the time critiquing the guy's view and half the time explaining what your own view is. And he obviously doesn't do any of that stuff. Anyway.
Oh, sorry, this is dominoes all the way down. So when we're talking about worldviews, this is a worldview debate. This is theism versus naturalism. This is a worldview. Yeah. Worldviews typically consist of three branches: epistemology, which he doesn't want me to deal with, knowledge; metaphysics, which he cannot deal with, he has to grant himself; and usually ethics, but for the sake of argument tonight, I'm going to probably focus more on teleology, which...
So I found that strange because he says it's epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics. I'm not going to talk about two of them. I'm just going to focus on, and then it brings up like seemingly a fourth one, teleology. What's that? Is that metaphysics? Was that like a value theory, epistemology? Whatever. I suppose he meant I'm just going to focus on metaphysics, and in particular, I'm going to focus on teleology. But it just sort of sounded weird, like it furthered my thought that these are just plucked out of the ether. These ideas, the structures, it's all just about him laying down. Like I'm allowed to have all of these things. I'm going to tell you, fuck you. You have to have epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics, and I don't know, also teleology. It's up to me to say that. And also, you're not allowed to have anything cool or interesting on your ontology. He's just like setting it all out, and yeah, it's kind of annoying.
Deals with purpose. From my opponent's worldview, he would have to concede there actually is no purpose for him being here.
Yeah. Okay. And this is another one of these. Yeah, I think that's right. There's no purpose in his sense of purpose, maybe, because if you're not an advocate of teleology, then you're not going to have, I mean, in the sense that he means it like a grand, massive plan. Everything's like pointing forwards towards this, whatever, God's goal for whatever. If it's not, some big cosmic plan, then, well, if you don't have God, then you don't have that type of cosmic trajectory or telos. Sure, well, obviously, trivially, if there's, well, not trivially, I guess, maybe you can have teleology without theism, but, you could just reject that notion of universal teleology. Nonetheless, you could have your own account of what purpose is, right? Like, why is it not allowable that you can have your own purposes for doing things? I mean, like, what's the purpose of me doing this video? It's going to be the same whether or not God exists, it seems to me. It's not going to fit into a big plan if God doesn't exist, but it's still the same to me. Right? It's my own, that's what purpose is on my worldview. So just to say he doesn't have purpose just means he doesn't have JimBob's idea of purpose. But that's not the same as saying he doesn't have his own account of purpose. And by not even entertaining the thought that maybe he's got his own account of that, right? Could he have a different idea of that notion than the one that I've got? No, it's just if he doesn't have my view, he's got nothing. Right? The resources of his theory must be impoverished to a kind of comical degree. Almost cartoonish in his approach to metaphysics. I promise I didn't think of that before. It's just popped into my head.
None. In fact, if you took it more strictly, he was determined to be here. He had no say because there is no him. He was referring JimBob exists. No. Under a naturalistic view, an object exists. There's no...
Right. But of course, like, even if you are a sort of staunch materialist, well, you're not going to say, well, you might actually go the route of saying there's no such thing as the self or whatever. Fine, even if you do that, you're gonna have to like build your theory around certain things that we all take for granted. Like, even if you're kind of Buddhist and think that ultimately the self is like empty, still you're gonna have to, what are you doing when someone says, have you got any change for the jukebox or something? You say, yes, I do. You're not going to be, you said I. You don't believe in I because you're a Buddhist. So fuck you. Like, you're allowed to use the word, right? It can still play a role and fit into your conceptual scheme, even if it's not the same exact, like, because you don't have JimBob's idea of an eternal soul that live on in God's glory or something. That doesn't mean that by that token, there's no other concept you could have. I don't know if this is like particularly helpful, but for me, this is one of the lighthouse that I always think about for this sort of idea off in the distance that guides me in the right direction is that, like, in the philosophy of time, you've got the distinction between the A theory and the B theory. And there was an exchange between, I think, Quentin Smith, who's an A theorist, and Nathan Oaklander, who's a B theorist. And they had a series of papers, and I think because they back and forthed so much on this issue, there's like a book or something where there's a chapter, and only one of them writes a chapter, one of them writes the response chapter, blah blah blah. Super interesting, but a lot of it came down to like one of the things I think I learned by reading Oaklander then was just that, like, yeah, the A theorist sort of feels like they own certain temporal concepts like change or whatever, and on the A theory there's change, but on the B theory there's no real change or whatever. And Oaklander's point, at least in one of his points, was that, like, the B theorist has their own account of change, right? And the question shouldn't be who has change on their theory. It's how do we compare these two rival notions of change? I think Oliver Tooley comes along and has these arguments about how then they kind of collapse into each other, and it's not even clear what the difference is at a certain level between the A theory and the B theory. But whatever. The point is just that, like, it's wrong. It's a kind of mistake to be made of, like, taking a concept that's theory laden and then, like, taking it with you on it's almost like an external critique when you're looking over the shoulder of the other guy and say, well, you don't have this concept on your view. They don't have your concept on their view. They've got their concept on their view. And, like, if you want to fruitfully compare them, you need to sort of, like, have the ability to empathize and see the world from their point of view and understand it. Which is why I was saying I think Presup is kind of like a lack of empathy philosophy, where you just sort of try systematically to not see the world from the other guy's point of view. It's like how it works or whatever.
JimBob or personhood. There's no identity over time. It's all nominal from his view. But again, he grants himself these distinctions, which are metaphysical, immaterial, and abstract. They're not found
in which you can do if you're a naturalist, according to me.
Nature. So
they're not found in nature, he just said then. But, what does nature mean? Right? As far as I'm concerned here, nature just means something like it's stuff that's not, it's a closed causal order, effectively. If you want explanations of what's something that's happened as the result of a causal interaction, that explanation isn't going to be a big mind reached in from beyond the spatiotemporal world and fucked about with it. Right? That's the sort of thing we're ruling out. But then if that's all we're ruling out, I'm allowed to talk about immaterial platonic objects and whatnot. Now, I still have to tell you a story about how that works and how causal closure works with that type of thing. But it's not just a straightforward prohibition.
Being that he's going to argue for methodological naturalism, a view that holds that reality, metaphysical, is best explained by natural causes and laws.
So it sort of sounded like he was reading that off somewhere that he'd got from the internet, which he probably did. Fine. But watch here, as he's reading that quote. That's, I think, not his own words, and I don't think he internalized it or thought about it very much, because he immediately slides from that to just materialism straight away, or at least ontological naturalism.
It holds that science is the most valid way to gain knowledge, right?
Oh yeah, and this is another thing. Science is the most valid way to gain knowledge. I don't know what's going on here. It's methodological naturalism is an approach to doing science, right? Saying when we do science, we don't just like refer to agency for everything all the time. That's the right way to do science. But it doesn't mean that you can't have it. It's not really a claim about epistemology as such. It's a claim about scientific method. But it's another claim to say that the best or only way to get knowledge is through science. And I bet he'd love it if the view explicitly had been that the only way to gain knowledge is through science. I don't know anything enough about Peterson's view. Maybe that is his view, but that's what I would describe as scientism. It's kind of epistemological bogeyman everybody likes to complain about, because it's so easy to point out why that there are things there are things that we obviously take ourselves to know, like that I'm currently talking or whatever. I haven't measured anything in a test tube to find that out. Like, I mean, scientism is just like a kind of caricature view. But I don't think that's an entailment of naturalism at all. It's just an independent view that's wrong-headed. It's like extreme. It's like the epistemological equivalent to materialism. So yeah.
The problem is the claim that science is the best way to gain knowledge is a knowledge claim that's not gained by science itself. So what is he using for that?
See, there you go. That's just the standard scientism is self-defeating line. But scientism isn't on the table. So shut up about scientism.
Well, he's using nothing because it doesn't exist in his worldview. There's no naturalistic process that gets him that philosophical statement. And yet he's here stating it. He doesn't account for that, right? So I'm not going to grant him any descriptions. He's going to get into math. Guess what? Math, where'd you find that? Where's that in nature? Where's the natural process called math?
Well, I mean, like, okay, where is math in nature? I mean, the question with the poorly formed, right? It doesn't really mean anything to say where is maths. I mean, unless you've already said, I think everything that exists, even abstract things, exist at spatiotemporal locations, then it's not relevant to bring it up. I mean, where is maths on theism? Like, where is it? It's just as meaningless a question on theism as it is on atheism. So, or if he says, oh, it exists in the mind of God, as if that's like a deipity, well, I just kind of want to say, listen, sometimes like a poorly formed question having an answer on your view isn't a theoretical benefit for you. It's just, I don't care if you've got a vapid answer to a meaningless question. I'm not going to take that to mean that you win or anything. So sure, you can say where is an interest rate, something silly like that, and you're not going to get an answer on materialism. You're also not going to get an answer on theism. So like, shut up.
Nowhere. So where does it exist in the naturalistic worldview? It's tied to another thing too. The only way to even get to science, by the way, which he's.
And I mean, hold on. Before we get lost on this one, you might be thinking, well, okay, you can have a naturalism. Maybe I'm just like being sneaky here and just allowing myself a load of stuff I shouldn't really have because I'm just like I'm a materialist, but I'm just pretending or something. You might, if you really really hate me and you think that, fine. But let's just think about like physicalism for a moment. Suppose you're a committed physicalist, right? So that you buy into all of this idea about like the queen of the sciences, like the base of all of the other scientific explanations. Everything's like reducible to or dependent on, etc. Stuff that's described by physics. And then someone goes, what are you going to say about maths then, Mr. Physicalist? Well, I mean, on the one hand, the physicalist has got the resources to say things like, or positions are available still to the physicalist, it seems to me, like formalism, for instance, was a kind of like ontologically lightweight account of mathematical logical ontology, where you're saying something like these like rules that are like specified on pieces of paper and like certain practices and behaviors that you just go to, or behaviorism even, where you basically suck all of the ontological air out of a practice and set of terms and stuff and just view it simply as people doing things, walking into rooms and talking to each other, which is perfectly amenable to the physicalist to be able to talk about. Or you could even go the kind of Putnam-Quine route and argue that, like we were talking about before, I think that you can make the argument that mathematical realism is like the most economical way of accounting for something that's required by our best sciences or best theories. So if numbers and mathematics, pay their way in the mathematical physics that we use, in terms of all the explanation and stuff that they do, then whatever the most economical account of what they are is, could in theory pay its way by all of the work that it does. And it seems to me I don't know what the problem is in thinking about it like that. I mean, obviously there's detail to be cashed out, but like the approach doesn't seem like intrinsically wrong-headed. So I mean, I think physicalist can just like say a lot of stuff about what maths is, and he just I don't know whether he's just completely unaware of this or if he's being deliberately disingenuous or what.
touting is the best way. The only way to get to science, you would know this in a basic philosophy of science course, is you have to start with knowledge.
That was, didn't you catch that one? You would know this if you did even basic philosophy of science course. And I do think it's remarkable if at cartoon school he was able to take a module in the philosophy of science. I mean, remarkable that that would be on the agenda there. But I don't know, maybe he's studied philosophy of science, and I'm being unfair and trying to be funny, but like, it's very patronizing to say that, and it then comes across very misinformed to think that like the first thing that happens when you take a philosophy of science class is that they sit you down and say everybody's got a worldview and that's made of ethics and metaphysics and blah blah. That's not what happens in day one of a philosophy of science class. I was just talking to someone the other day about when I was at the University of Bristol, and I sat in as a postgrad on James Ladyman's philosophy of science class, the third year class, and week one on that was, I think he was trying to scare everybody off, but he made everybody have to work through a chapter in David Albert's book on Hilbert spaces and like vectors in Hilbert space and stuff. And he just wanted to put off people who weren't serious and serious enough to spend a week studying vector spaces. But I guess it was also useful for the stuff that came later. But like the idea that what you do in the first week of a philosophy of science class is to hear all this pre-sup routine it's laughable. Maybe it is his experience and he did study it somewhere and that's how they did it, but like it's not mandatory. There's not some like you have to do this thing first in philosophy of science. So I think he's just overreaching there, frankly.
Scientific things to even do science. Everything he grants himself, meaning, information, mind, math, language, universals, particulars, laws of logic.
Particulars. Both universals and particulars. Presumably particulars are allowed for materialists, at least particulars. Jesus.
What is the status of these things from a naturalistic worldview? Where do they exist? How do they exist? Why do they exist? He just grants himself and says, you can't talk about these things. This is
Imagine, just machine gunning a load of questions like this on theism. What is an idea? What is a, fuse box? What is a number? What's epistemology? And answer this random question about set theory. And if you can't answer any of those, then I win the debate. Like, it's just it's weird. It's a bit of a gish gallop, right? It's too much, everything, everywhere, all at once. Just like slow down, dude. These people are scared of nuance. I think they just want to roughshod over the debate because he doesn't really want to talk about anything. All he wants to do is strut around. He wants to deliver his ponage lines. I think one of them's coming up in a minute. It's frankly disgusting imagery that comes out of him.
About describing stuff. Sorry, describing things under your worldview is mere utterance from an orifice that happens to be at the upper side of your body.
That is a horrible image. I can only think that it makes me think that JimBob has terrible breath. I mean, I'm not saying it smells like shit. It probably doesn't, of course, but it's a disgusting thing to say. I don't know. It's not needed. Is it needed? I'm not a big rhetoric fan in these types of things. I'd rather just stick to make your point in a fun way, but like make it in an artistic or interesting way or whatever. But why do you have to talk about like your opponent and dehumanizing him in terms of like orifices and feces and stuff? It's just, I don't like it. So I'm banging it back over the net, really. I'd never really bring that sort of thing up, but yeah, it paints a horrible image in the mind. I don't want to belabor it, but I am.
Actually, ontologically, no different than farting.
You know what?
Honestly,
It does seem like everyone in the room is enjoying that, so maybe I'm just fuddy-duddy with an even grayer beard than this guy.
honestly. But he has another problem, because if you do a methodological naturalist view, you're also holding a type of ontological naturalism as well, or
I
metaphysical.
mean, that couldn't be more blatant how he just rolls between them. I mean, if you do a sort of methodological naturalist view, then you're also basically just a naturalist in the ontological sense. He just connects them together. Like, give me an argument about that, right? Explain to me how that has to be the case, because clearly the whole point of the distinction is supposed to be It's just a way of doing science. It means, it's the sort of thing you'd find Christian scientists who are saying, sure, whatever, we're studying through empirical methods that don't presuppose that there's some like agency at present throughout the experiment or whatever. But that's okay. I can still be a theist who believes in miracles and at the same time just not let it kind of infect my approach to science. But this guy just reckons you can't do that. You just have to, even if you make that distinction, you just somehow have to also just be like, well, yeah, I also actually just think everything is made of matter. Isn't he just saying it because it's easier for him? That does seem to be, it's difficult to escape that view, right?
Naturalism, which is the belief that all of reality is composed of natural elements. There is nothing that exists beyond the natural world. Sorry, you just denied knowledge.
But that's, okay, firstly, there's nothing that exists beyond the natural world is ontological naturalism, philosophical naturalism. It's exactly the thing the methodological naturalist wants to not say. So he's just running those two things together. But now he's going to start saying things like knowledge and truth and blah, blah, blah don't exist in the natural world. And that's now just kind of question begging, because like, what about all of the naturalistic accounts of epistemology and truth and blah, blah, blah? He just thinks that you can't have any of them.
And information. Where are they located? Where are these facts you speak of? Can you hold them?
Where are they on theism? Where are they on theism? Where is information on theism? I win.
Can you touch them? Can you smell them? Can you put them in your coffee? You cannot. So he's actually appealing to a bunch of things that he would argue have to either be non-existent and illusory or supernatural. That is to say, I'm not talking about ghostly. I'm talking about above nature, something that's meta.
Yeah, the term he's searching for is an abstract object, not the thing that naturalists reject. He did say, talking about ghosts or spooky things. That's the thing that naturalists reject. The interesting discussion is, can you explain the world without appealing to outside divine agency as being responsible for things like crops failing and tapping at the window or whatever, right? Is that a fruitful hypothesis to develop in science? Yes, obviously, massively successful in science, a huge track record of being successful. Is it the actual debate here is taking that view seriously? Is it actually just suppose that there are no outside super agencies that are affecting things? Does that explain everything, right? Or is there anything that it doesn't explain? That's an interesting idea. I mean, that's the sort of thing you want to know. But all he's interested in is saying, what best explains the world? One view that's like horrifically restricted in what it's allowed to posit, and another view which I guess by default just has everything it's allowed. That's just not even an interesting discussion. I mean, the other guy's not even advocating for the strict view, so it's like just Commodus fighting the crippled dwarf, whatever horrific spectacle in the Colosseum. It's like, it's not fun or interesting. What you want to see is two people who are like broadly equal fighting against each other. I mean, I don't want to see anyone fighting against each other, but like presumably the sport, such as it is interesting when there's actual tension and drama and you don't know how it's going to go. Why, pitting these two views against each other is not intellectually interesting. What it's interesting for what his interest is in doing that, I take it, is as a dominance behavior. He just wants to dish out ponage. So yeah.
Nature. It also denies truth itself. He's here arguing for the truth, and he has no ontology for truth. That doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. You're right. What you said doesn't make any sense. I don't know what he means by he hasn't got any ontology for truth. Ontology is like a thing that you can, comes in degrees, right? Like if I'm a deflationist about truth, that means, that's my ontology is like thin when it comes to that. Or if I'm like a realist about abstract objects, and my ontology is like relatively thick as correspondent. But just saying he's no ontology just means like he doesn't admit anyone else's view. I mean, you either have JimBob's view or you don't have a view of nothing, right? That's what's on display here.
In fact, any proposition or utterance he makes is merely a determined effect. It's epiphenomenal from his mechanical device. That's why he wanted to make sure that I can't attack determinism, because he knows under his worldview, if all of our beliefs and utterances and counters and arguments, if they're all determined from a strict mechanistic body that we have no control over, how does he know which is true or false? There's nothing there. It's just.
Yeah. Okay. So this is like the C.S. Lewis argument from reason thing. It's the Tim Stratton argument. It's just a really boring, terrible argument. But whilst we're on the subject, right? Let me moan about it. Because the thing about this argument, the one like kind of crucial flaw, it seems to me, well, one of the crucial flaws, but perhaps the most egregious aspect to it, is it's constantly just about like, oh, look, if on determinism, then whatever you believe now was like fixed at the Big Bang or something, right? And it does sound a bit strange, obviously. Although, forget determinism. Let's just say it was true a million years ago that I would be saying this today. It feels to me that tense logic is enough to get you on a much stronger type of determinism, but whatever. Let's just go back and think about it. Like, okay, on the one hand, if all of my reasoning is predetermined, that might be weird to think about, but it doesn't mean that it's bad reasoning, it seems to me. I can imagine there being good predetermined reasoning and bad predetermined reasoning. After all I have to do is think about, like, if this predetermined, like a robot or whatever, who's taking in sensory input, and then, like, let's say I present a robot with a number of apples or something, and they have to look at the apples and like figure out how many there are, and he writes a number down. Well, if he's always getting the number right, and I mix them up and try and hide an apple or whatever, and he figures it out and writes the right number down, then, damn it, that's whatever's going on in the head, it's reliable. I'm not sure I would call it epistemology necessarily, if it's just a mechanism that doesn't have the consciousness, whatever the consciousness is, but like, it's reliable. And I don't know if determinism is true and that's how my brain works, then it could be reliable. Like, for the epistemological challenge here seems to be that you couldn't know it, or there'd be something wrong with your reasoning process just in virtue of it being determined. But that's not true. It could be. The question is, like, what's the detail of the deterministic process? Does it get the right answer all the time? In which case, what's your complaint, right? And think about it on the other side. Let's add free will to that mix. And free will being there doesn't mean that it's automatically better. I mean, people can freely choose the wrong thing all the time. Presumably this guy, if he's got free will, is making a load of stupid blunders in this debate the whole time. His free will isn't helping him automatically, right? Free will isn't an epistemological like cure-all that just means that because it's freely chosen, that therefore it's like epistemologically good or something. And it being predetermined doesn't mean that it's epistemologically bad. Like, it's just irrelevant, right? It's like saying whether or not the person's wearing grey socks or brown socks or something. Like, whatever, I don't care about that. That's not salient to whether or not the reasoning process has been done in a kind of responsible, like epistemically responsible way. So it just seems to me irrelevant, complete irrelevancy.
Matter in motion. So he comes here holding a view that he's strict matter in motion and I'm strict matter in motion and all of you are matter in motion. There's no persuasion.
That's Democritus. That's not naturalism.
There's nothing being argued. There's just utterances in space and time. But then he grants himself, no, we can evaluate the utterances. No. Evaluations under your view, Peterson, are just more processes. They're just more processes happening.
Yeah. Evaluations are processes, bud. Evaluations are things that happen over time. Even on theism. The fuck is an evaluation on theism if it's not a process? What are you talking about? Like, he thinks that sounds good. Like, maybe it sounded good in the shower or something before he came into the debate. But, like, you have to say what you think as well. I mean, obviously, it's something that happens over time. And, like, I just don't know why you can't just say, like, it depends what sort of process it is. And I can imagine a better process and a worse process. So it being a process is not itself something that means that it's bad. Fucking idiot. I'm verging on the fucking idiot end of the scale. I don't know. Actually, maybe that sounds fair. Still think maybe he's a victim. I don't know.
So if you follow naturalism to its logical ends, it leads to all sort of logical absurdities. For example, my opponent like I said, will refer to facts in his rhetoric, yet his view defending tonight must reject the existence of facts because they're not empirically verified through his system.
Okay, this is a new one as well, new thing. Like now it's empiricism as well. Like the only way you can know something is if it's evident to your senses or something. He didn't say that, did he? It's not my view of naturalism either. I mean, it's metaphysics. He even said he's not going to talk about epistemology. Right? He's going to help himself to metaphysics and teleology, but not epistemology. But now, all of a sudden, it is about epistemology because naturalism means that you're like a radical empiricist as well for some reason. Plucked out of thin air, maybe.
He's using evidentialism, science, empiricism. He's
evidentialism hyphen science hyphen empiricism. Like it's all just one chunk thing. I mean, do you not believe in scientific evaluations of stuff? Do you not trust your own senses as well? I mean, like, is there empiricism on Christian theism? Is it all direct intuition to God's thoughts or something? Like, you're just as much of an empiricist as anybody else, buddy. And like, at the very least, say something about how this doesn't apply to you. Do you know what I mean? There's no attempt at doing that.
Assuming a bunch of things before that he can't justify under that view. He just grants himself those things. He's going to do it all night. Or all morning, sorry. Woo. I mean, who debates naturalism at 9 a.m.? Definitely not either of us.
What? Definitely both of you.
Okay, so if my opponent holds that his view holds that everything is a result of natural processes, purely chemical and physical causal chains, if everything is the result of natural processes, then his own reasoning is an effect of this chain. When he makes an evaluation or utters a proposition, this is merely the effect of molecules in motion. Now, how is it there are true or false chemicals? This is an absolute defeater in his view. Forget.
It's. I mean, I'm going over the same thing here. Maybe I'll start taking some questions or whatnot, bring someone else on. But he'd love it if the other guy was like, everything that exists is matter in motion. Also, facts exist or something. But I just don't think he said those two things, and he's just sort of like, excited. Let's say at the prospect that is what he said.
The tag argument: you can't have knowledge. Okay, tell me. Let's make it really clear here. I have a simple syllogism. So, premise one, under naturalism, physical events are not true or false. They just occur. He grants himself evaluations. However, premise two, under naturalism, evaluations and propositions are physical events too. So, what he's doing now is he's giving his evaluations, which he holds are strictly material.
Wait, sorry, premise one was what?
Okay. Tell me. Let's make it really clear here. I have a simple syllogism. So, premise one, under naturalism, physical events are not true or false. They just occur. He grants himself evaluations. However, premise two, under naturalism, evaluations and propositions are physical events too. So,
okay.
What he's doing now is he's giving his evaluations, which he holds are strictly material, matter in motion, and he gives them a special pleading. He does a special pleading fallacy. He grants those set of molecules in motion a special position that they can evaluate other molecules. So his view is molecules evaluate molecules. So in simple form, if premise one is physical events are not true or false, they just occur. There's no true tornadoes. There's no true lion eating a zebra head. They're non-propositional. Premise two, evaluations and propositions are physical events. Evaluations and propositions are not true or false under naturalism. There's no way out of this unless you grant yourself some special condition for evaluations.
Wait, I'm not sure there was a conclusion. I think it was just three premises. But I think you're supposed to derive I think it's supposed to be an incompatible triad or something, right? So premise one, everything that exists is molecules in motion. Premise two, evaluations are just molecules in motion. Premise three, evaluations are true. Premise four, nothing is true on physicalism. I don't know. someone explain this. He's probably said this before, and maybe someone else knows it better than me.
So the question is,
it didn't have any logical form I could discern. I couldn't see it being like modus ponens or something.
back to purpose. What are we doing here? Aren't we arguing for truth? That's not accounted for under naturalism. Did my opponent really fly on a plane to stand here to argue that his own reasoning is a set of chemical reactions and my chemical reactions are wrong and his are right? That's absurdity. How can a set of chemical reaction he calls his worldview be correct or incorrect? There are no true or false blades of grass. There are no incorrect tornadoes. Under my opponent's view, all propositions and evaluations must necessarily be physical processes and their determined effects of processes. He has no control over what he believes, and neither do I under his system. So what the hell is a debate? Let's make fart sounds with our mouth and then just pretend that either one of our positions can be evaluated for truth? There's no true track under his view. He granted that in his opening as well.
All right, I think I'm bored. I'm not sure there's anything else left actually after this point. But one other thing I just want to hammer home whilst I remember is that even physicalist, right, is not necessarily saying that everything that exists is physical or like reducible to sciences or physical sciences, right? Not necessarily. I mean, what they're saying is that like it's still a claim that's related directly to the causal order, the stuff that's causes and effects, right? It's a claim about those types of things, and it's not primarily a claim about everything in the widest possible sense. So like, it's not clear that someone who's a physicalist can't also think that there are like abstract objects either, I guess, as long as they keep them out of the causal order. And I think that the sort of crucial aspect of these theories is like naturalism and physicalism is that they're related to like actual explanations that people doing science are interested in, and they're not really about like it's not an idea that was forged in philosophy of religion. It's something that's coming out of physical sciences, and I think that part of it's just missed on him. I think, like I was saying before, I think this is kind of cultural zeitgeist in America and evangelical circles, etc., that thinks that people postulate scientific theories because primarily they're like worried about religious ideas, Big Bang theories, just so that we don't have to admit that God exists, or evolution is just so that we can deny Jesus or something. And I think it's difficult not to see it as a kind of aspect of American culture that's like backwards and unsophisticated. Like America is a kind of yin and yang, like the most advanced science on the planet in history, and some of the most like primitive kind of expressions of Christian viewpoints that you can find these days. Like, people who advocate versions of Christianity in America that's extremist, as far as I can see. And this kind of like fear mongering over stuff like religion, stuff like evolution, is bizarre. And the fact that it like continues to this day. Flat eartherism is another expression of this. And I think he's just sort of missing the point, that like crucial connection to the real practice of science and what is motivating people to advocate for physicalism and naturalism. He just takes it as a kind of a cartoon-like extreme materialism. Anyway, right, I'm going to shut up for a second. I'm going to go back to have a look at the chat and see what's going on. See if anyone's chatting stuff. There's loads of chat going on. This is cool. So, just scrolling up. There's too much for me to read, obviously. I'm open to the idea of being accompanied by people if I know who they are. For instance, I see Nathan's in the chat. I think I saw someone else I know as well. Who is it? I see Scott Terry's there. Hello. I know I'm complaining about people who who say some similar things to stuff you would be sympathetic to, let's say. So apologies. Don't mean to just dump on one type of person all the time. All right, cool. Nathan, if you want to jump on, let me know. I'll send you the link. I'm just seeing if there's any super chats. You'd feel free to send me super chats. I don't mind. I quite like money sometimes. Caleb W140. Nobody cares what you think. Presumably, that's true. Okay. All right. Cool. I'll send you this link now, mate. Oh, I'm still sharing. I guess that's